Matthew 6:19-24. Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy, and where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroy, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. The eye is the lamp of the body. If your eyes are good, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eyes are bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. If the light of your body is full of darkness, how great is that darkness? No one can serve two masters. Either he will love the one and hate the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money.
Therefore, I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat or drink, or about your body, what you will wear. Is not life more than food, and the body more than clothes? Look at the birds of the air. I mean, they don't sow or reap or store away in barns, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. And are not you much more valuable than they? And can any one of you, by worrying, add a single hour to your life? Look at the flowers of the field. Do you see how they grow? They don't labor or spin. And yet I tell you that not even Solomon, in all of his splendor, was dressed like one of these. And if this is how God dresses the flowers of the field, which are here today and tomorrow are thrown into the fire, will he not much more clothe you, you of little faith? So do not worry about your life, saying, what shall we eat, or what shall we drink, or what shall we wear? For even pagans run after these things, and your heavenly Father knows that you need them. But seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all of these things will be given to you as well. So do not worry about tomorrow, because tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day has enough trouble on its own. How many of you have had nights when you put your head on your pillow and you tried to sleep, but because of circumstances that were going on in your life, sleep just didn't happen, right? I mean, you just like, you were in it and you're sticking it out, and it's just like, I'm determined to keep my head on the pillow, and it just wasn't going to happen. Where all of a sudden your mind is racing from things that are going on. It's sort of like this whirlwind, and you can't even like focus on any one thing because it's all just sort of this cyclone of thoughts. And your heart is racing, and you just feel like this stress, like you're laying there and you just feel your pulse thumping. You've had nights like that? Has anybody had like seasons of life like that, or if that's normal for you? I admit I've had nights like that. I've had seasons like that. I had a season of my life when it felt like things were just sort of falling apart, and you're questioning everything. And there were nights when I couldn't sleep, and I just throw in the towel and wake up at 2 a.m. or something, and just go for a run or exercise just to try to catch some breath. I mean, that's not a fun place to be, right? I mean, that kind of life that is just sort of filled with worry and anxiety. Worries, they're like this thief in the night. They rob us. They rob us of sleep. They rob us of joy. They rob us of life. They rob us of just the goodness of life that God wants to give. That's what worries do. And so Jesus, like he says, don't worry. All right, like, thanks, Jesus. Stop it. Like, how many of you, like, you're laying in bed, you're trying to sleep, and you just say, stop it. Stop worrying. Like, is that helpful? Right? I mean, it's not all that helpful, is it? Like, just don't do it. I'm trying not to do it. This whole idea of do not worry, it's really easy for me to stand up here and talk about. It's really hard to do. I mean, I'll be honest, it's really hard to do. Do you want to know what I worry about? Maybe you have worries that are similar to mine. I worry a lot about the people I love. I worry about my family, my wife, Carmen, and my kids, my 3 kids. I worry about car accidents. I worry about my kids and their future, whether it will be safe, whether there's somebody who wants to do them harm. I worry about their health. I worry about their decisions, whether they'll make good ones in the future, whether they'll learn to trust Jesus and follow him. I worry about my own health, for Carmen and I, like, are we going to keep being healthy? I worry about the health of my family, like my aging parents. Somebody kind of got on me and said, hey, your parents are my age. I didn't say aged parents, mom and dad, if you're listening. I said aging parents. I worry about it. I worry about like stuff, my possessions. Like I worry about termites and mold. I worry that the rust on our van is going to get worse and it's going to fall apart. I worry about house fires. I have this recurring worry about house fires. Not so much that we'll lose the house, but just that somebody will get hurt. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night and I can't stop thinking about it. I worry about culture. Like I worry about just like stuff in culture. Anybody else worry about culture these days? Like I worry we're actively witnessing the demise of democracy. Like that's sort of going down right in front of us. Thankfully, like I have to remind myself regularly that that Jesus didn't come to institute democracy or capitalism. He came to set up his kingdom, and he is on the throne of his kingdom, and his kingdom is not in jeopardy, and it's not up for vote, right? I mean, so I kind of have to remind myself of that, but I worry about it. I worry about this stuff. What do you worry about? What do you worry about? It's not a rhetorical question. I think it'd be really helpful to know, to just name the things you worry about. In your bulletin, the ushers handed you when you came in, there's this list. It's an empty sheet of paper. At the top, it says, my worries. What I'd like you to do is just pull this out, and there should be a pen around you. If you don't have one in front of you and the bench in front of you, find one somewhere around you. And as worries come to your mind throughout the next 15, 20 minutes, just write them down. Write them on this list. Whatever they are, be as specific as you want to be, because I think that's powerful. Jesus said, don't worry. And here's the thing. If Jesus said, don't worry, it has to be possible to not worry. He wouldn't have said, hey, do this thing, and then it's not possible to do that thing, right? So he said, don't worry. He's inviting us to this unworried life. I want that life. I mean, I really want to live that kind of unworried, at ease life that Jesus seems to be holding out to us. How do we do it? If Jesus says we can do it through his power and following his lead, then that's what we want. So we want to take a look at how Jesus invites us to not worry. The first thing I think like we just sort of have to acknowledge is that worry is worthless. Did that like offend anybody? Because some of you are like maybe like grade A professional worriers. Like you've gone pro a long time ago at worrying, and it really feels like the more you worry about the future, the better the future is going to turn out. I mean, it really feels like that. I'm going to tell you it's not true. Your worry has no impact on the future whatsoever. Worry is absolutely fruitless way of spending our energy. Jesus actually says this. He says, who of you by worrying can add a single hour to your life? There's actually an alternate reading that I really like of that same verse. It says, who of you by worrying can add a single cubit to your height? Some of us are like, oh, I wish that would work. It's like me spending time worrying about how tomorrow is going to turn out or how the future is going to unfold is about as worthless as me worrying and thinking I'm going to grow another 2 inches taller, right? Or like that somehow by worrying my hair is going to stop falling out or turning gray. Like, is that going to happen? Like, no, it's not going to happen. It's not a beneficial way of spending our time. So we just have to sort of name that and admit that it's not actually a great way to spend our energy. Now, what Jesus isn't doing is he's not advocating laziness. Worry is not planning. Worry is not forethought. Worry is not being careful and cautious. Does that make sense? Those things aren't worry. Worry is not putting in the preparation so that, when you get to tomorrow, you're actually prepared for it. That's not worry. Worry is what happens when you've done all the planning and preparation and exercising caution and you still can't let go of it. See, Jesus isn't advocating laziness. Some of us, we read this passage and it's like, well, Jesus is sort of asking us to, stop planning for the future and just sort of fly by the seat of our pants. I have a friend who mixed his metaphors once as he was talking about flying by the seat of his pants, and he said, the problem is that too many people are just shooting from the seat of their pants. I will admit that that's a problem, and that is something to worry about. Woo, that's a bad day right there. Maybe want to rehearse those metaphors before he is. Oh, man, that was great. So, like, worry is not planning for the future. It's what you do after you've planned and you just can't stop thinking about it. That's what worry is. See, worry, Jesus isn't saying, hey, stop working. He uses his example of, like, nature. He says birds and flowers. Well, do birds work? Yes, right? I mean, birds work hard. You can have like this little bird who's building a nest above your light or like in your patio or something, and you go out there every morning in your pajamas with your broomstick and knock that stinking nest out of there, and what happens? Like a day or two later, there's a nest again. Birds are always like gathering sticks and straw and building their nests and getting worms to sort of feed themselves and their children. Birds are doing that. Flowers work. You can't quite see it, but there are these chemical processes going on where they're taking in nourishment from the soil and they're photosynthesizing. That's a hard word for me to say. I mean, flowers, they've got this stuff going on. But do you know what birds and flowers don't do? They don't stress about tomorrow. Oh my goodness. Like, is the sun going to shine tomorrow? Like, what if the sun stops shining? And what if I never take in another ray of light? What if there's no more rain? Like, what if the dry season is coming and there's no more rain and I'm just going to sort of wither here and die? What if a windstorm comes and blows our nest right out of the trees? What if a lumberjack comes and cuts our tree down? What if there are no more worms? Like, there are no more worms to be found and we all starve to death. See, birds and flowers, like, they just don't have the capacity for that kind of worry. And so Jesus is inviting us to this unworried life. Let me help to define what worry is. Two definitions, maybe. That worry is a dread-filled vision of the future that leads to fear and anxiety. Worry is this dread-filled vision of the future that leads to fear and anxiety. Worry is always companioned by fear and anxiety. So like you watch, TV is horrible about doing this to us, isn't it? I mean, we watch these TV shows, we watch these crime dramas. And we've talked about this in the past, but I think it's just real. It's kind of, especially for those of us who are prone to worry, why do we watch these things? Right? We're entertained by them. And what ends up happening is the worst possible scenario happens every single episode. What never happens in one of these crime shows is like these FBI agents are sitting in their office and they're just sort of like looking around at each other, telling stories from the weekend. And they drink coffee and catch up on paperwork all day, and the phone never rings except for somebody to say, hey, thank you so much for your service. I hope you have a great day. And they hang up the phone and punch out at the end of the day and go to sleep and sleep well for the rest of the night. Like, that never happens. That show doesn't exist. What does happen is every single time the world is on the precipice of disaster until somebody intervenes and sort of saves us from a certain demise. See, worry is this anticipation of the future that's full of dread. Worst case scenario, it's going to happen. Worry, another definition for worry, this is from James Bryan Smith from A Good and Beautiful Life. He says this: it's a disproportionate level of concern. Concern isn't bad, but it's a disproportionate level of concern based on an inappropriate measure of fear. Of fear. That's what worry is. And so Jesus is not advocating laziness. What he is inviting us to is to trade our worthless worries for trust. For trust. To actually exchange our worries for this relationship of trust. Now, the question is, if the key to overcoming worry is trust, this element of trust, the question is, who am I going to trust? Like, where am I going to place my trust? And Jesus says, well, here's one option. Take a look at chapter 6, Matthew 6, verse 19. It says, do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moths and vermin destroy and where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where moths and vermin do not destroy and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. And then he goes on, verse 22, the eye is a lamp of the body. I love what Jesus says here. The eye is a lamp of the body. If your eyes are healthy, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eyes are unhealthy, your whole body will be full of darkness. Now, what Jesus is saying is like this idea of the eyes are the window to the soul. So if you look out at the world and what you see is a world of scarcity and lack, and where it's sort of a dog-eat-dog world out there, and you have to take advantage of everybody you can, and that's the world you see, if the light that you're taking in is darkness, he says your whole body is going to be full of darkness. What you see matters. He says the opposite. He says if your eye is healthy, if you look out at the world and you see a world that God created, a world that is an absolute miracle, a world that is held together by the presence of God, if that's what you look when you see the world, your body is going to be full of light. And he says, if the light within you is darkness, how great is it? Does that make sense? Like what we see when we look at the world matters, what we choose to see. And then he says this, no one can serve two masters. So he's getting into that whole trust thing. Either you will hate one and love the other, or you will be devoted to one and despise the other. You can't serve both God and money. Now, does anybody remember the old version of that last verse? You can't serve both God and money. You can't serve both God and mammon, right? Now, what in the world is mammon? Mammon is this like a name, this personification of stuff, money, wealth, possessions, treasures. That is mammon. And the reason it's given a name is because it has a God-like influence over us. Like, do you believe that? Like, Jesus actually says you can't serve or you can't trust God if you're trusting mammon, your stuff, your money. You can't do it. They're competing allegiances that we just can't do both. So here's what I'd like us to do. We're going to exercise what it looks like to break our trust in mammon. Just go with me on this. Pull out your wallets. If you have your wallet, if you have a purse or whatever, just sort of pull it out and hold it out in front of you. If you don't have a wallet, you have your phone. Our phones are like the next sort of thing to where our money is, right? Because you have our bank accounts and all that stuff. So whatever you've got, wallet, phone, something like that, hold it out in front of you. Now it looks harmless, doesn't it? I mean, it looks like a hunk of leather. My wife's is a whole lot more colorful than mine, or cloth or whatever. This is a temple to the god Mammon. This is where worship of Mammon happens. What happens is we are tempted, we hear this whisper that says, your value and your security is based on what you have in here, right? If you just had more, if you just made an extra $5,000 a year, if you just had a bigger savings account, if your 401k was bigger, then you could rest easy on your bed at night. Does anybody else hear that whisper? So I want us to exercise this. Take your wallet and give it to somebody else. Just sort of trade it. Trade it. Give it up, release it. There's power in this, right? Right? So just give it to somebody else. Trade it. Everybody do that? Okay, if the ushers would come forward, we're going to take an offering. Just give like there's no tomorrow, right? We're gonna kick Mammon to the curb. Okay, you can give it back. No, there's this amazing power that our stuff has over us. And we need to realize it, that take Jesus seriously, that he says like we can't trust God if we're trusting money. If we're getting our value from how much we have, and it really doesn't matter how much we have. There are people who are very wealthy who are slaves to Mammon. There are people who are very poor who are slaves to Mammon, right? It's where we get our security. So there's this practice of letting go. There's this practice of saying, at some point, I'm going to have to let go of everything I find value in. See, that's what Jesus says. Like it's kind of a worthless thing to spend our life accumulating stuff. Because do you know what's going to happen after you accumulate all the stuff you want? You're going to have to protect it. It's going to wear out. It's going to break down. You're going to have to invest in security systems to protect it. And so he's like, that's what it is. So we get into these traps of like we're going to accumulate, work hard to accumulate, and then work hard to protect and keep it from somebody else getting our stuff. That's what our life is based on for a lot of us. And Jesus says, why do we do that? Because here's the truth. I'm going to have to let go of everything I hold dear in my life at some point. Naked, a man comes from his mother's womb, and as he comes, so he departs. He takes nothing from his labor he can carry in hand. There will be a point when everything we hold dear is taken from us. We release it. You know, there's this practice that I learned from another pastor that has been so powerful in my life. And I'd just like to share it with you because it might be helpful for you. Like there's this practice of release. And what I do, like in a prayer, like when I'm just sort of alone with God, having a quiet time, I will imagine everything I hold valuable. Like just sort of, and the way this kind of happens is like, imagine sort of you're on a beach and there's this river that's running past you and sort of goes down a ways and then around the corner. And you're there on the beach with everything you hold dear. And there are these rafts. And so one at a time, God will just sort of place one of these things in front of you. It's your wallet. It's your bank account. It's your house, your car, your wardrobe, your trophies, your health, your job. And one at a time, you just sort of take it and you put it on this raft and you just sort of send it down the river. It's this practice of release, of letting go. Like, I'm going to have to get rid of it sometime. And then what happens is, then there are these people. And this is where it gets really hard. These people we love. And sort of one at a time, God just sort of brings these people, like your children. And one at a time, there's this sense of release. Like there will be a time when my relationship with my children ends. It's reality. And so one at a time, you just simply, you place your child on this raft and you just sort of allow them to go down the river and sail into God's care. Because I don't really have control anyhow. And there's this relationship with my wife. And I realize that my relationship with my wife is at some point going to end. And I don't get my security and my value from it. I can't, because it's fragile, it's vulnerable. And so, like, there's this practice of even sort of placing her on this raft and allowing her to sort of drift out of sight. And there's this release. And there's all of a sudden, then there's nothing left except you standing in the presence of God. And what happens? What happens when we do this, when we do these sorts of things that help us practice release, letting go, is it frees us up from getting our value and our security from stuff that is temporary. Right? Because I see people who approach the end of their lives, who approach like the certain end of their lives with this confidence and trust and peace that I want in my life. And there is, I think, this practice of letting go, it helps us get to that place. And it also then helps God teach us how to hold things, that we get to hold things appropriately. We get to enjoy relationships. We get to enjoy the things that we have. And we get to sort of use our stuff to bring God glory while it's not controlling us, and we're not listening to the promise that if we can just hang on to this, it will give us security and peace. This is a practice that maybe is helpful for you to break the power of mammon in your life. So the trust that we have, it has to be placed in our Father. You realize how many times Jesus in this passage, he says, like, your Father cares. Like, your Father cares for the birds and the flowers. How much more will he take care of you? He is your Father. He is on your side. He is with you. He sees what you need before you even ask him. Your Father is not a taskmaster. Your Father in heaven is not a slave driver. He's not someone who's hard to please. He loves you and he knows you and he wants to be with you. This is who Jesus says your Father in heaven is. And so we learn to entrust ourselves to God. That God is there and he actually cares for us. This is why Jesus says, like, so don't worry then about like the stuff of life, what you'll eat, drink, wear. The pagans run after these things. Now, do you know who pagans are? Broncos fans first. Raiders fans, we'll put them in there too. Sorry, that was for you, Jesse. Well, it's true. That's not exactly what Jesus meant. Pagans are people who live unaware that there's a Father who cares for them. Pagans are people who go through their whole life thinking they're on their own, and if I don't fend for myself, nobody else will. It's up to me to make things happen. There is nothing out there beyond myself and my control, so it's all up to me. That's what a pagan is. And Jesus says, like pagans, people who don't even understand that there's a heavenly Father live this way and are sort of scratching the existence and accumulating and protecting. He says, but don't live that way because your heavenly Father knows what you need. He knows what you need. Like, we can be people who say yes, like we affirm that there is a Father in heaven, and yet we can live our lives as practical pagans. Like we live like everything is up to us, and we try to accumulate and secure all of these things, and this is what Jesus is teaching us to release. Take a look at 1 Peter 5:7. If we're going to live an unworried life, it is going to be because we place our worries in the presence of God. We exchange our worries for trust in Him. Take a look. So Peter is writing to the church. He's writing from Rome at the end of the first century. There is all sorts of trouble happening. And here are the words that Peter says. Cast all your anxiety on Him because He cares for you. Cast all your anxiety on Him because He cares for you. I think that'd be an awesome verse to memorize. Like, I think there's some of us who just need to have this word very close to our lips over the next week. Cast all your cares, your anxieties on Him because He cares for you. There is this practice, and I think it's all throughout the Bible, of casting your cares on Jesus. How do you do that? The first thing you have to do is name it. Like the Psalms teach us this. Read Psalm 55 sometimes. Like David is all over the place. And by the way, Peter is quoting Psalm 55, verse 22. He's like, David, he's in this psalm, he's just sort of like naming everything that's inside of him. And at one point, he's like furious at God, and then he's like sort of feels guilty, and then he trusts God, and then he's furious at his enemies, and he's asking for vengeance on his enemies. And it's just like this whole whirlwind inside David's mind. He's just sort of getting it out there. Right? He's naming it all. This is the first step to casting your anxieties on Jesus, is giving your anxiety a name. It is impossible to cast your anxieties on Jesus unless you give it a name. So write them down. I don't get up in the morning and go for a run anymore. I have very few sleepless nights anymore. In fact, I haven't had one for years. Because the moment I feel these worries just start to bombard me, I get out a pen and a paper and I write them down. I give them a name. When you name something, you have power over it. It is no longer this sort of like faceless thing in your mind. It's this thing that I'm worried about. You take control over it and you name it. And then what you do is you say, God, this is what I'm worried about. This is what's keeping me up at night. This is what's beating me up. And I don't want to carry this thing any longer. So God, I choose to give it to you. Because I trust you. Please give me your peace. And you know what God does? This Father who cares for you, He takes it and He gives us His peace. This is this process of casting your cares, your anxieties on Him because He cares for you. It's a very simple practice. It is so powerful, and we see it all throughout the Bible. I would love, read the story of Hezekiah, 2 Kings chapter 18 and 19. This is what Hezekiah does. He's at, this horrible place in Israel's history. And the worship team can come on up, by the way. We'll close with this. Horrible time in Israel's history. And Hezekiah, he's like experiencing the Assyrian armies are marching toward Jerusalem. And the king is just saying, like, this is going to be awful. We're going to surround the city. And this is exactly what they did to their neighbors to the north, to Israel. They surrounded the city for 3 years, cut off all flow of commerce in and out of the city. And it's a horrible existence. And so Hezekiah, who's king of Judah, he sees the armies marching. He hears the threats from the Assyrian king. And he takes this letter that he's received and he just lays it out before God. And he says, God, here's what I'm worried about. And this is a very real threat and worry. God, I cannot carry this on my own. And do you know what God does? He takes it. And he speaks to the prophet Isaiah. And Isaiah writes this amazing prophecy. He says, no, don't worry. This king is going to go home with his armies the way he came. And the Spirit of God comes and delivers the people without them ever having to raise a weapon. Right? When we surrender and we entrust ourselves to God, we give the Spirit power to move in our lives that we could never do on our own. And so I want to end this morning, I invite you to stand. if you have worries, if you have things that are just sort of eating your lunch, as a simple act of entrusting yourself to God, I invite you to come and bring them forward. And you don't have no rhyme or reason, just lay them here sort of as a symbol of, God, I'm releasing this to you, and I'm asking you to fill me with your peace. So throughout the song, you can come forward and do that. There'll be a prayer team up front if you'd like somebody to pray with you.